The views and opinions expressed by the guests of the Inspira Podcast do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of any agency of the United States government or any organization, public or private.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Inspira Podcast, hosted by your girl, me, Erika Mueller Chen. I'm an international development specialist with over a decade of experience leveraging the amazing power of sport to promote peace and positive social impact. My career has allowed me to live in Europe, Southern Africa, and Latin America. In 2022, I accepted an offer for my dream job in sports diplomacy. And I also became an employee family member to a U.S. diplomat, aka an EFM. This podcast is all about inspiration and career advice. Each episode, I'll interview an inspirational global changemaker working in sport for development, social impact, or the diplomatic service. This series is perfect if you have interest in breaking into one of these sectors, or you've already landed that dream role and are keen to learn from thought leaders. Enjoy today's episode and stay inspired.
Cheerleading is this powerful thing that incorporates music, and music is culture. So all we had to do really, so this is what my company did, that's Cheer Sensation. We built out a model that was Caribbean friendly. So we took out everything that we called white people music and we put in our music. We took out all the dance styles that we called white people dancing and we put in our style. Right? I'm telling you, this is literally how we saw it. But we made like this hybrid that was now culturally appropriate. And it took off.
Welcome, friends. Today we are here with a special guest, Stephen McCubbin from Jamaica. Stephen McCubbin is a policy, community, and youth development specialist with over 10 years of experience in sport for development and peace. Coming from humble beginnings and being offered the opportunity at a non-traditional path, it is here that he feels he built a career that would seek to provide new avenues for youth who hailed from similar backgrounds. And as folks may know, the name of this podcast is Inspira. I like to start each episode with a reason why our guest inspires me. I actually ended up re-recording this introduction because I learned so many new things about Stephen during the conversation. He inspires me because of his commitment to putting the human element first in all of his work. He also brings expertise around how to use sport as a vehicle to prevent violence. Finally, Stephen is deeply passionate about elevating the voices and perspectives of community members and folks working at the grassroots level. This inspires me because he now has a seat at many decision-making tables and he continually speaks up. I'm wondering if you can tell us more about Jamaica. Is there any historical or cultural context that you think might be helpful for us to know before we start to dig into your career journey and work in Jamaica?
Well, little known fact, firstly, I love talking about Jamaica. So Jamaica is an island in the Caribbean. It's south of Florida, about 90 miles south of Cuba, surrounded by the Caribbean Sea. Population is somewhere around 2.7 million people living on the island. So pretty small population. I think the most important thing to consider in any developmental conversation or conversation about development in Jamaica's social development in particular is just understanding its colonial past. Right, so Jamaica was first the home of the Taínos, the Arawak Indians. They were the first people there. It was colonized by the Spanish first, and then, of course, by Christopher Columbus. And then it was taken by the English when the Spanish fled, thinking that it was more of a burden than a benefit to the Spanish crown to continue to fight the British for, dominion over the island. So, firstly, that would explain why we speak English, right? But our native language is Patois or Jamaican Creole, which is a derivative of our colonial influences. The motto of the country is out of many, one people. So it's just a melting pot of cultures that are really just trying to coexist in this really small space. We don't really have racism in Jamaica the way the rest of the world or the global north would have racism. But what we do have in Jamaica is classism. It just so happens that the ruling class tend to be a fairer skin complexion because the house slaves were more Eurocentric, and they're the ones that would have gotten more wealth at the end of slavery. So the darker you are, the poorer you ended up being. The lighter you are, the more money you ended up having, and the more viable you would be socially and economically. So that just kind of gives, some social context for how modern Jamaica operates. As we go along with the conversation, we'll understand more how that kind of plays into some of the social stratification that we deal with in Jamaica and how sport, and sport for development and peace in particular has just been, this really powerful uniting force.
Thank you for that mini history and social cultural lesson, which really helps me and helps others enter this conversation. When we're speaking about anything location specific, colonialism has impacted the world in such deep ways and continues to impact the world today. Thank you for that backdrop, and I'm excited that you enjoy speaking about Jamaica because that's what we're going to do today. Take us back to some of the earlier days of your career or even your upbringing in Jamaica. Tell us what that looked like for you and how living in Jamaica influenced some of your interests and early opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I grew up poor. I mean, third world poor, developing country poor, which is a very different look at poverty, right? Situations where my mom used to tell us this thing as we were growing up, right? Whenever we were hungry, it was, the angels feed those who sleep, which was kind of her creative way of saying, go to bed, you won't feel it. For us, there was always this real understanding and this mystification that surrounded education because we were just always taught that the way out is to go to school, the way out is to be educated. That was always the key to everything, and for us it was like trying to deal with that dichotomy between wanting to be educated and wanting to provide, wanting to help my family. Obviously I couldn't do that while going to school where these kinds of social conditions exist. A prevailing condition is always going to be violence. The violence that we deal with in Jamaica, a lot of it is politically motivated because again it's a fight for resources, and who controls resources? It's politicians, it's government, it's social institutions that are supposed to be helping. I used to play football, I used to do basketball, I used to do track and field, I used to do cheerleading, I used to do drama, you name it. If it's an after school activity, I'm going to do it because I just don't want to go home. That first and foremost is, just acknowledging the space that sport provides. If nothing else, it's just an opportunity to get away from reality. When I left high school, because you leave high school at 16 years old in Jamaica. That's if you finish. So when I left high school, I didn't have anything else to do. The rite of passage at that point was to join a gang because there's nothing else to do. If you join a gang, you get protection, you get food, you get shelter, you get respect. I just, it, it was never attractive to me. So what I did, I got a bunch of my friends together who were dealing with the same kind of hopelessness and depression of being at home without anything to do. There's this, it's a cultural site in Jamaica. It's a heritage site called Devon House. It used to be the home of the first Black millionaire that one of our prime ministers protected and made it a heritage site. It's a huge tourist attraction now. But they have these huge sprawling lawns. And when you live in the city, because this is in Kingston, it's hard to find these kinds of green spaces where you could just play, well, safe spaces, really. And people just started showing up. I wasn't trying to do anything. There was no method to it. I just wanted to get away. More and more people just started showing up. And one day we were there and a group of guys came. Right. And by now everybody starts calling me coach. Right. Because everybody comes like, what do we do? What do we do? So it's like, oh, yo, coach, 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 coach. It's like, man, we're the same age. Stop calling me coach. I'm like 16. Stop telling, So they come and I'm like, all right, you got to warm up. One of them, he pulls me aside and he's like, coach, no disrespect, but we're already warmed up, and I'm just like, no, you gotta participate. We're doing this as a team. We all gotta do it together. And that's when he was just like, well, coach, we're coming from this place called Central Village, right? That's in a whole other parish. To drive to get to Central Village, you'd probably drive for around 45 minutes. Remember, this is Jamaica, so that's a lot of driving. You'd drive for about 45 minutes. But they walked from Central Village, from St. Catherine to Kingston to come here. And I was like, why would you even do something like that? And he was just like, well, coach, we just wanted to get away. The elections are coming up. Things are getting really bad. And we were just looking for a way to get away. And that's when I realized that so many of us shared like this same story. And I started realizing just that this is more than just me. This is bigger than what I thought it was. And it wasn't about whatever we were doing. It wasn't about cheerleading. It wasn't about football. It was just about getting away and being around people who also wanted to get away. And that's when I understood that, I'm doing something here that's meaningful, that's got not just value, but impact. And really that's where it started.
Tell me about how you handled that responsibility. I mean, what you described in terms of the backdrop of the country and just what you had at home. You had so much on your shoulders, so much weight, figuratively speaking. What did you do to navigate that? Were there any resources or mentors or answers you could find elsewhere? Or was it more experimental, figuring it out as you go? How can sport be positive in your life and the lives of others?
It was completely experimental. There was no method. I didn't even know what was going on outside of the fact that I understood that we all needed this. One of the most underestimated thing in the lives of a human being and human development is just the freedom to play, right? Just to run about. The only deliberate use there was that we knew for sure that we were being intentional about getting away.
Mm-hmm.
And when you put people together, especially young people together who are like minded, and you give them room, the creativity and the ideas that come out of that is it's mind blowing, and it's paradigm shifting, and it's world changing, because that's what happened. It's hard when to see how people view sport for development, because it's almost as if sometimes we remove the human element from a lot of things. And that is why I think, like, it doesn't matter where I end up in life, grassroots will always be my passion, because that is when you really see what you're doing. That is when you really experience and interface with what that impact really is and how those decisions really play out. And I think I just have a responsibility to say and to share and to continue to create spaces, because these spaces save lives. Something as simple as scoring a goal has transformative power, because you've done something good and you've helped a team and you've moved something forward and you were successful at something and you did something, and I'm valuable. And I feel like if I don't show up, these people are going to lose me. So I now start understanding that there are people in this world that just want me to show up, and that's enough.
You said something that struck me as quite profound about the human element of sport for development and keeping that front and center. It is about people. Being safe is the number one ingredient. I'm wondering what happened next. You mentioned this was happening when you were around 16 years old. You were bringing people together, whether you wanted to or not. It was happening around you. What happened next?
Well, next is where the fire came, you know, and that's it's when you start understanding what you're doing and you start realizing that, hey, this is good. So then it became about, how do we build this thing out? We started trying to connect with what is now an industry. Sport, for all intents and purposes, is about winning. You know what I mean? We were not good at anything that we were doing. We were not winning anything.
That's the great premise for an amazing sport for development story.
Yeah. And it was about, like, now going to the Ministry of Sport and sitting there for from morning until evening, waiting on somebody to notice that you're there and have a conversation with you. And then, I didn't know at the time that, hey, you know what? You're going to a government office. Maybe you shouldn't wear shorts. Maybe you shouldn't be wearing sneakers and a t-shirt. But I'm a coach, so that's what I'm gonna wear, right? It's fit to purpose. And so this is how I would show up, and I would never get in the door. I would never get in the door. So I had to start, like, understanding now and learning how to be a professional, because I had to represent an emerging industry in a way that people could identify with, because they didn't know what this thing was. So I had to start like reading a lot. I had to start like studying and talking to people and learning and trying to understand like what is what. And I still didn't know it was sport for development. I just knew like we were doing something good with sport. I sat down one day and it was just like I wanted to give up. Like I was done. I was like, I'm done. I can't do this. I can't afford to do this. I don't know what I'm doing. Like I'm over it all. I need to focus on me. I need to figure out my own life and yeah, I can't do this anymore. And I met this guy, Matt McDonough. At the time, he was the regional director for the ICU, which is the International Cheer Union. And there's this mega cheerleading company in the US called Varsity. So he worked with Varsity and they visited Jamaica because they had heard about what was going on with cheerleading and they were doing some expansions of their own. And when they asked around for, who do we talk to if we want to know about this? Apparently, that's what I was known for now. So they connected with me. One of the things he said to me that sticks with me to this day, he's like, stop asking people for stuff and tell them what you could do for them, right? Stop going to people and like add value, and then there will be value to extract. And I was like, you're a white man. You can say whatever you want to say. I don't care. Like, you don't understand what the reality is here. All right. So, whatever. Like, I didn't want to hear it. I was like, whatever, man. They actually had a really good model at the time because what they did, instead of sending all these people from the global north to teach us and to stand as the experts, they took a group of us and they brought us to the US. So I got to go to Lake Geneva in Wisconsin, which was amazing. And I got to learn. I started training my friends, teaching them all the stuff that I was taught. Of course, with our own, cultural flair, right? Because ain't no way we're gonna teach like
I can picture it now.
Yeah. You're not gonna catch us in Jamaica saying, "Give me a blue." No, it's not gonna happen, right? But what cheerleading is this powerful thing that incorporates music, and music is culture. So all we had to do really, so this is what my company did. That's Cheer Sensation. We built out a model that was Caribbean friendly. So we took out everything that we called white people music and we put in our music. We took out all the dance styles that we called white people dancing and we put in our style. Right? I'm telling you, this is literally how we saw it. But we made like this hybrid that was now culturally appropriate and it took off. Right. So I trained my coaches to teach this. And then what I would do is we would place them in schools. That's how it started out. And it went from being 3 schools to schools starting to call, hey, we want one of your coaches. Or could you come work with our students? Or could you do this? Because in addition to everything, we're still paying attention to the human element. It was never about winning. It was never, ever about winning. It was about how I felt about myself when I was in this space. And that is what we kept trying to create, safe spaces. And then it became attractive to the LGBTQIA plus community in Jamaica because Jamaica is a very unsafe place to be as a member of that community. But then here is something because it's cheerleading. So immediately they love it, right? And it's a safe space. So they're able to practice safely. And because of now the respect that I had, right? Nobody would bother them. Because remember, we started out with like real hardcore people from hardcore communities, what we call ghettos and garrison communities. They're exposed to all the risk factors to become violent offenders. So if you were supposed to do a profile, the people we started with were always going to be the people the cops would search for. And now here they are in a space with one of the most persecuted communities in Jamaica. And then they're doing cheerleading where the facade and this toxic masculinity subsides. And these people who have the predisposition to be the violent offenders are now the ones protecting that community. And it was just a beautiful thing to see. And it just kept growing and growing and growing. And I don't know. I don't know. I just think when you create something that is organic, something that is safe, it will grow. It's just it you just want to plant the right values in that garden, give it the care it needs, and it will grow and it will bear fruit.
Stephen, I feel like I need to go to your TED Talk. Like I could listen to you speak about this story for a lot longer than the time we have today. Quick break here to highlight that there are currently 5 Inspira Podcast episodes available for your listening pleasure. Episode 1 provides my background and motivation for starting the podcast. Episode 2 is with Miriam from Egypt, a former pro footballer who broke into the sector through an internship. Episode 3 is with Stephen from Jamaica, who founded a cheerleading organization that prevents violence and empowers the members of the LGBTQ population. Episode 4 is with Chanel from the USA. She's the executive director of the DC United Foundation, the Major League Soccer team in the US's capital city. Episode 5 is with Ben from South Africa, and we talk about the evolution of the sport for development and peace sector. New Inspira Podcast episodes will be released every Tuesday, starting on January 31st. If you like what you hear, please give Inspira 5 stars on your chosen podcast platform and write a kind review. That would really make my day. Thanks, and back to the show. I was going to ask you more about why cheer, but I think you answered it, because there are these typical sport for social change stories where football or soccer is the transformative mechanism and it's the popular sport of many countries. And so to have cheer be the transformative pathway, the safe, the fun, the organically grown activity is really interesting and dynamic to hear about for many of the reasons you mentioned. You mentioned it's inclusive, the LGBTQI community was interested in it, and perhaps most importantly, you and your team made it culturally specific. You were adapting it and evolving it and personalizing it because you knew what you and your community would enjoy and what you'd appreciate. Yeah. And so I just think that's remarkable and set cheer sensation up for a great amount of impact.
Yeah, definitely. In Jamaica, dancing to dance hall music, which is Jamaican music, because we have reggae and we have dance hall. Reggae is socially conscious. Reggae is our rebel music. Reggae is our social commentary. Dance hall is our rebellion. Dance hall is where the aggression comes out. Dance hall is that underground community of music. Dance hall is where the lyrics are violent. It was activism through this art form, and it is still activism through this art form. So when you take dance hall music, which is something that is masculine in nature, and then you take cheerleading, which is something that is seen as feminine in nature, and you put it together and you create this kind of culturally appropriate cocktail, it breaks down a lot of that toxicity, right? Because now you have these hardcore dance hall lovers. The very same music that gets banned in so many parts of the world because it's so anti-gay or anti-this or anti-that. is what we take and we use it in a creative way to bring people together. And then you start seeing some beautiful things coming out of that. You start hearing people protesting the lyrics. So when you sit in a space and you know, my friend that's sitting here right next to me, who I stunt with every day, I know that he's gay. And then I hear music that says gunshot for somebody that's gay in Jamaica. You kind of see that look that's exchanged between them because now I understand that this is wrong. And now I see how it affects you. Now I see how you hear it. And I start to feel empathy. And I start realizing that, like these, like everybody is just somebody. We're all people, right? So it starts to break down a lot of these things. And cheerleading in Jamaica has more men in cheerleading than women. Which whenever I tell people that, they're like, what? No way. Yes. Because for a group stunt, for example, it takes 3 or 4 guys to lift one girl. So on a team of 25, if you want to be good, you're gonna have more men than you have women. So as it grew out, I got a call one day to where I was basically told that I was nominated for a Prime Minister's Youth Award for excellence in youth development. And that was my first time, like, well, firstly, it was my first time winning anything because I actually won it. But it was my first time entering into like the macro developmental space because now the government was paying attention and saying, how does this work? How do you do this? How do you make this happen?
Thank you, Stephen, for describing the important role that music plays in Jamaica, and then sharing that incredible story with us about you being named the Prime Minister's recipient of the Youth Award for Excellence in Youth Development. Congratulations, so amazing. Along the lines of what I was wondering when you were speaking about value earlier, you had someone advise you at an interesting moment in time that you should try to add value before extracting value, before asking for
Yeah.
something, which is a really interesting concept. I can certainly recognize the applicability when it comes to professional relationships or networking. I mean, that's a number one piece of advice, essentially, offer before you ask. However,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, sometimes you don't have that privilege or that opportunity to either have something to give or even have the time to wait before you ask, because sometimes the things you need are so urgent. And so you
Yeah.
speaking about that evolution in terms of receiving that advice and maybe saying, oh, like, not right now, like, we just need to do the work and see what happens. And then you start to, it sounds like, receive the recognition from others in the value that you are providing, creating and providing safe spaces, about perhaps doing conflict resolution, promoting
Yeah.
inclusion, breaking down toxic masculinity. It sounds like that was quite holistic, much as your journey and your implementation of sport, where you were addressing a need at the moment and things holistically evolved. Is that what you sensed in terms of starting to receive support or even funding or more formalized recognition? How did that start to come to be, and why do you think that started to come to be?
Well, it's fantastic that you said holistic because Cheer Sensation's first slogan was fostering holistic growth through the sport of cheer. So it was always like very deliberate. And that's something to note about SDP, right? It has to be the deliberate use of sport. It cannot be accidental. So we could stumble into it accidentally, but I am telling you, there is no way it is going to be sustainable unless it is deliberate,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not, there's no glamour, it's thankless, right? If people are listening and they're thinking that, hey, this is where I'm going to go to make my millions, no, it's not. But I could tell you, if you have millions to spend, it's a nice place to spend it. Then I won this award, which kind of brought me, like I said, into this macro developmental environment where it was like, all right, we love what you've been doing as a government. We love what you've been doing, and we want to know how. We want you to break it down for us and help us to understand how you've been able to replicate this, because this is something we're interested in. What the government was interested in particularly was using the model, not the sport, but the model as a tool for violence prevention. So now it was like my first time like trying to build this out for scale, not just the school, but communities and parishes. What we started realizing, right, which is something that we know now, is that sport by itself will not fix anything. It does. It's an important part of a toolkit, but send us in by ourselves, and we're never going to get it done because we cannot do it. And it is important to understand that limitation. We cannot do it. We need psychosocial therapy. We need the counselors. We need the social workers. We need the nutritionists. We need the entire suite of social programming to be able to get anything done. All sport does in a situation like this is get the young people in. We make it attractive for them. They're never going to show up for immunizations, but they'll show up for football, they'll show up for cheerleading. And then when you say to them, all right, a requisite of this participation is to get immunized, then you give the Red Cross an opening. A requisite to continued participation is good grades in school. Then you give the NGOs that are providing educational support an opening. When you say to parents who are very dependent on whatever the care packages that may come from the child's involvement in sport programming, because there's a nutritional component, parents understand they cannot afford to feed their kids otherwise. So they show up. And it is huge in developing countries when parents start showing up for their children. And then they see their kids play for the first time. They see their kids compete for the first time. They see their kids happy for the first time. And it triggers something inside them. And they continue. And now we're able to measure these kinds of things. We started out with only 2 parents showing up. 3 months in, we have 10 of them. We're doing well, right? So this is where I started learning how to build out these programs and start pulling in all these stakeholders to create something that was holistic and something that could meet the needs of the children that we were trying to reach. So the important learning that took place there for me was that sport was not the problem solver. It is just a tool. It is just a part of the toolkit.
Stephen, for somebody so humble, you are really a fun and interesting interview. And from my really simple, open-ended questions, you are dropping so much knowledge and insights. And I just want to pull out a few trends, a few themes that you have shared so far in the conversation. One is the human element, putting that first in sport and any sort of programming that involves humans. Second is the importance of holistic program development, listening to the community, meeting them where they're at. Third, and kind of more recently, what you've been discussing is sport the need for sport to be intentional and the benefits of using sport as a hook to then add on social value. And fourth, and finally, in response to what you just shared, how sport really is just part of the toolkit, part of the whole social change and social support ecosystem. It's really, really insightful. So thank you. When did the Commonwealth Sport for Development and Peace Network come into play?
So it's interesting because so all of these programs start happening on like more a national level, right? And I was invited by the Prime Minister of Jamaica, right, who's still the Prime Minister, Prime Minister Andrew Holness, to serve on a commission out of the office of the Prime Minister called the National Commission on Violence Prevention. So now I am dealing with violence prevention at the very highest level in my country. And I sit there, like the first couple of meetings, I sit there in complete awe because there's doctor and PhD and professor and reverend, and I'm just Mister, you know what I mean?
Coach.
Coach, because again, what they helped me to understand at this phase of my own professional and personal development was the value of my lived experiences, was the value that I brought to the table, because everything that they were studying, I did it without any of the research or whatever. It was completely experimental. It was completely grassroots. It was completely from a place of, I've lived these experiences and I understand how we think and how we view things. And the Prime Minister understood the value of having somebody who lived these experiences sitting at the table, somebody who's done it, somebody who's gotten it done, to advise academics and keep them grounded, help them to understand that, look, it may work this way on paper, but when you get on the ground, none of this survives first contact. No plan survives first contact. That kind of helped to build my own confidence, where I started to understand that, there are a lot of people who are sitting in these rooms or at these tables who have never experienced this stuff. They're creating programming for phenomena they've never interfaced with. And that is a problem. So I had a new problem that I wanted to solve. Now I was sitting at a level where I could say, this is what is happening in Jamaica. And we have countries in the global north that are creating programs and creating funding opportunities, and they're dictating the terms, right? And that is in these spaces, I started it was challenging because, again, I was afforded the opportunity to even exist in these spaces because of funding that USAID provided. And then here I was in a new space at another level, asking questions about the funding, like what happens when the funding cycle ends? How do these programs work? Are you telling me that it's gonna end after 2 years? Like all the gains, or how do we continue? What are we gonna do? And then I started realizing now that as a small island developing state, as a country in the global south, we were not responsible for the direction we went with a lot of the funds that was provided. It came with all sorts of strings attached. It came with forms that we had to check boxes and deliver on things that that were not solving problems for us. How do we fix that now? That became the question. And that's what led me to the Commonwealth space. Firstly, because I was upset, because I was like, oh, these colonizers, stop it. Like, stop it, man. We're supposed to be free. Stop telling us what to do, right? These are the remnants of slavery. You should stop doing this to us. And I'm always the persistent objector, right? So I wanted to complain, but I wanted to complain to people who could do something about it.
I know we giggle there a little bit to lighten the tension of this really serious subject and perhaps the common and intense challenges that you just spoke about. I want to emphasize a few of them. You talked about the Prime Minister's interest in including people with lived experience in the decision-making room and the value of that, hinting at perhaps the reality that there's a lack of inclusion of people who may often be considered beneficiaries of government-funded aid or community programs. It cannot be said enough how crucial and helpful it is to involve people like you with grassroots insights and trust from the local community when creating and implementing community solutions. What some of this also comes down to, in my view, is what is often referred to in sport for development as the gap between research and practice. Having conversations and collaboration across these different roles can only improve understanding and effectiveness of programming. I'm pleased to hear that you were able to bring your practitioner experience to advise researchers, politicians, and funders in how to address the problems that, as you said, they may have never even seen in real life, only read about it. Further, you spoke up in that decision-making room with critical questions around sustainability, specifically what happens when funding ends, as well as the big development question, who's responsible for the direction of how the funding is used and which problems, solutions, and voices are prioritized. This may sound familiar to many who have experienced firsthand the complex realities that sport for development has reflected from society, namely the relationship between the global north and the global south, especially the power dynamics that shape this relationship. We may not have the space or time to brainstorm solutions today, but I do hope that these topics spark further exploration from listeners and ignite a renewed commitment to addressing these challenges. Back to Stephen.
How do I add value in a way that allows me to be in a place to be able to extract value? So I engaged with one of my friends who was on the Commonwealth Youth Council, and he was just like, "Hey, I'm going to nominate you for this Commonwealth Youth Award and that was again for development work." When he nominated me, I made it. I won. Like, I was recognized as among their 16, what they call young people of the year. And I got awarded. So I got a Commonwealth Youth Award for development work in the Caribbean, right? And yeah, and they gave me, I got money, which was cool, right? It got donated to the work that we were doing. They told me about CYSDP, right, which is the Commonwealth Youth Sport for Development and Peace. At the time, it was a steering group that they were trying to transition into a network, and they needed a coordinator. So they had open call for applications for a coordinator. Getting a seat at the table is neither here nor there. What do you do with that seat? And there are too many young people that just want a seat at the table. It's like that's the destination.
Mm,
It's like, oh, we have a seat at the table, we're good now.
mm,
No, we are always going to be representative of the people who will never even see the door to this room.
mm,
We're not there speaking from our own name. We're there representing something that is bigger than just us. And I had to learn this. So it's okay if you're hearing this and you don't know it. If you feel bad, that's okay because we're all learning, you know? So I was in a space where I was trying to change something for my country. And I realized that our hands were tied
mm.
because funding comes with instructions and deliverables. And I said, okay, well, how do we change that? And I got the opportunity to be able to now serve as the coordinator for the CYSDP. And now, like, I'm able to, so we have a seat on KBOS, which is the Commonwealth Advisory Body on Sport. It's the largest decision-making body for SDP in the Commonwealth, which at the time was 54 nations. Now it's 56. And it's amazing to be able to say this to people who are actually like making some of these decisions. And I'm just like, man, this is crazy. How did I get here?
Wow. Well, Stephen, you may not like to hear this, but I could see you being a very effective politician in the future in terms of already having your platform and being able to see these problems at the real human level, at the community level, and working your way up into those rooms that you have thankfully been invited to because you deserve it. And now you are educating others on what the issues are and the potential solutions. So I just think that that's an amazing evolution and a well-deserved evolution for you to be there. And what I see you doing is really transforming opportunity to action, which is so important. You've turned your adversity into your advantage. And I won't claim to have created that phrase because a friend of mine named Isaac Serwanga uses that in some of his educational and motivational speeches.
One of the things I've always said to myself is I have two decisions, right? My choices are I could be a victim of my circumstances or I could be a product of my circumstances. And I will always choose to be a product of my circumstances. When I speak about my adversity, it will always be about how I overcame it or how it helped to shape the direction that I went. And words have so much power. I will never defeat myself.
Mm,
Marcus Garvey has this very powerful quote. He says, "A man with no confidence is twice defeated in the race of life."
mm,
Right? With confidence in self, you have won before you've even started. And that's something I hold dear to me.
mm, mm. Well, Stephen, I would love to ask you some fun questions. Before I do, are there any career topics or experiences that we haven't yet discussed that you wanted to share with the audience?
Well, I mean, the only other thing is, and you mentioned it earlier, but I am actually now an active politician.
Are you? Wow. Okay, so you didn't mind that I said that.
No, I didn't at all.
Tell me
But
more.
yes, I am the counselor caretaker for the Vineyard Town Division for the Jamaica Labour Party, right? And it's pretty cool because the Vineyard Town Division is where I grew up.
Mm,
It's where I'm from, so I now represent them politically. One of the things that I've done that I'm most proud of is I brokered a ceasefire along the corridor, which is the longest held ceasefire we've had since 1988, right? And 1988 is a very significant time in Jamaican history. So to have been able to broker that ceasefire, which is the first since then. It's definitely, I guess, one of the crowning jewels in my political career. But it's not something that I talk about with with a light heart because again, it's real people, it's real lives. I was able to bring the representatives from both political parties, which is myself plus my political opponent, together, the police and members of the community, and also representatives from active gangs, because we have to understand that they too are stakeholders.
Mm.
It was not easy, not at all. But we were able to get it done, and the ceasefire is holding even now, even throughout COVID, when the social conditions eroded in very significant ways. It held. It held, and that's huge, right? So if I never win an election, I know that I did something that's worth talking about.
Mm. Wow. Wow. How powerful. What an amazing accomplishment, and one that serves your country through a different lens, through that political sphere, and really just goes to show how coalition building can lead to positive change. Congratulations on that amazing achievement.
Thank you.
Now that we know more about our guest's career journey, the rest of our conversation will allow us to have some fun and get to know our guest on a personal level through some rapid fire questions. We'll then start to wrap up with pointed questions focused on advice and how our listeners can transform interest into action. Enjoy the rest of the conversation. How would your friends describe you?
Stubborn and driven.
Who is your favorite athlete?
Usain Bolt.
How would you describe him?
Uh, Breaker of barriers. All right, limitless, no limits.
I like that. I like that. What's your favorite food?
I like KFC. You'll find that that is a Jamaican thing.
Favorite aspect of Jamaican culture, and you can't say KFC, and we've already talked about dance. So tell me a new aspect of culture.
No, all right, so the my favorite aspect of Jamaican culture would just be like our ability to just embody duality. Like we're the most friendly, most aggressive people you will ever meet.
Interesting. Interesting. Favorite sports team?
Manchester United. I feel bad saying that right now, but yes, they are.
What advice would you give folks in Jamaica who want to work in sport for social change?
Oh, don't think sport. That's the best advice I could give to anybody that wants to work in sport for social change. Think human,
Mm,
think people,
mm,
think how can I make people's lives better? Because you don't have to use sport, right?
mm,
So if you want to make people's lives better, you will. And sport is hard to sell in developing countries because we've got other things we got to pay for: hospitals, police cars, all kinds of things that we don't have. And it's hard to sell sport. But the one thing everybody will pay for is people.
mm,
They will pay to make people's lives better.
mm. And also just being problem solvers, right? Like you're addressing a
Yeah,
need. So not necessarily sport will be the problem solving mechanism to that
yeah.
issue. So finding creative ways to solve problems could also help
And
market.
at the very least, if you're business minded, if you're
Mm-hmm.
enterprise minded, it's hard for people to tell you no to
Mm,
helping human beings.
mm, okay.
Right? Yeah, companies find it difficult.
Mm, mm. What about networking? Any advice for folks who are trying to network strategically?
Ah, network. I think the best way to network strategically is to make yourself someone of value.
Mm,
Right. I think again, it's this profound thing I heard years ago that I didn't want to believe. How do you add value? If you add value in the spaces that you are in, it becomes relatively easy to build out a network because people will want to be around you.
mm. Any resources you would recommend to listeners in any part of the world to learn more about the sport for development sector?
Sport and Dev, right? The website, definitely. You could go to, of course, your Commonwealth, right? You will find information there. You could look up CYSDP as well. And I mean, I'm always available for anybody who wants to reach out. I respond. I promise I respond to messages.
Wonderful, wonderful. Any last pieces of advice for anyone listening out there? You've shared so much about your learnings.
Humility is important, but don't let it be a shackle. A lot of people will try to tell you to be seen and not heard, and that's a lie.
Mm,
If you have something to say, it is important to say it because that is the value that you add, your
mm,
lived experiences. And always understand that sweat equity is important. The work you do is important. And you don't need any kind of external resourcing to do your work. You are your work and you are your greatest resource.
mm.
And if you could tap that resource, the resource of self, you will invite other resources.
Wow. Wow. I'm feeling so motivated to go do something. I don't know what I need to do, but thank you. Thank you for that advice. Stephen, how can our audience support you or your work moving forward?
Um, I mean, you could follow us online. So we're on all social media. There is Chair Sensation, which is CheerSensationJA. So that's Chair Sensation JA. Or you could follow me, that's Stephen McCubbin JA on everything. But if you do own a company and you see a proposal with my name on it, please look at it favorably.
You heard it here
Or
first.
if you have any RFPs or tenders
Mm,
that are looking at sport for development,
mm,
please reach out. We're always available, right? We're looking for strategic alignment, right? But of course, we maintain it has to be deliberate and it has to have people at the center of its core values.
mm, mm. And my final question that I love to ask all of my guests and bring it full circle in terms of inspiration. Stephen, who inspires you?
Marcus Garvey. I am very pro Black. I am very pro my experience as a Black person and how that has shaped how I view the global economy and, just international affairs in general. And he just embodies like what it means to be a Jamaican who changes the world and the way we see the world. So definitely inspired by him and his teachings, and I just love it.
Mm. And I didn't ask you this earlier when you were speaking about languages. Do you speak any local Jamaican dialect or other languages?
Then I must who come from Jamaica, but I must be Jamaican, right?
Stephen, what does that mean?
No, I all I said was I'm from Jamaica. Of course, I speak Jamaican. But I mean, a good thing to learn about Jamaican is Ironman. Ironman.
Mm-hmm.
All right, or no problem, man. It just means it embodies our spirit. You know, we're good and we're gonna be good and we're gonna keep going. All right. Like Bob Marley said, don't worry about a thing, because every little thing is gonna be all right.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Inspira Podcast with Erika Mueller Chen. I really hope you enjoyed the episode and found it useful. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and resources. Specifically, my LinkTree is there with tons of awesome information. Feel inspired to take action today? I've got 3 action steps you can take right now because you know your girl likes calls to action and the number 3. So here goes. Number 1, follow the podcast on your chosen podcast platform. Number 2, share your feedback with me through the listener survey listed on that LinkTree. And number 3, tell just one friend about this podcast so they can give it a listen too. And do I have any overachievers out there? I've got a bonus action step, which is to consider supporting me and making sure this passion project prospers. So, number 4, follow the link to buy me a coffee. That would be pretty amazing. Until next time, stay inspired.